Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on smart buildings brought to you by the IET East Midlands Nottingham Derby Network and presented by Schneider Electric. It's great to see so many people registering for this event, and I hope you are safe and well in these challenging times. Just to say a bit about the IET aims to inspire, inform, and influence the global engineering community to engineer a better world. I am from the IET Nottingham and Derby Network, a team of volunteers who organise free events, lectures and visits for all age groups across the East Midlands area. We're always on the lookout for new events, ideas and volunteers. So if you might like to get involved, then please get in contact. I'll put my email address in the chat so that you're able to connect. The IET has recently adopted this Zoom platform to enable CPD lectures and events such as this one from the comfort and safety of your own home. We have more webinars in the pipeline, so please keep checking the IET website for more details. That's www.theiet.org. After this lecture, you'll receive an email invitation to provide feedback on this webinar. Since this is a new way of working for us, feedback is particularly important to ensure both the content and the Zoom platform are appropriate. So if you could take the time to fill this in, that would be greatly appreciated. Now, in the Zoom app, I appreciate some of you are quite experienced with this now, no doubt, but if you look down at the bottom, you'll see a questions and answers tab. Please use this to post questions throughout the presentation before you forget them. And we'll try to get through as many as possible after the webinar, but depending upon the volume, this might not be possible to answer all of them. Also at the end, you'll see on the right-hand side, there's an attendees pane. You've got the option of raising your hand, and we can probably take questions that way as well. Throughout the presentation, look out for the QR code. You can see one in front of you at the moment. That enables you to connect directly with our presenter, Kaz, after the webinar via LinkedIn. I think there's also a QR code for a link to one of the Schneider Smart Buildings projects, which you may want to investigate after the webinar is finished. The lecture is also going to be recorded, so it'll be accessible from the IET website at a later date if needed. There's going to be an interactive poll during the webinar. Kaz will explain how this works when we get to that point. So I would now like to introduce our presenter this evening, Kasim Mohammed. Kaz is an experienced building services controls professional and has been involved in many key initiatives and projects, now leading the UK and Ireland Digital Energy Division as Vice President. With over 13 years experience working for Schneider Electric, he is passionate about making buildings smarter and has engaged with many customers around how technology across a building can enhance the customer experience, optimize energy usage and improve maintenance efficiency. So on behalf of the IET, I would like to welcome Kaz, and I hope you all enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. So yeah, as Matthew talked about, from Schneider Electric, over 13 years of experience, primarily working with building management systems, working with power systems as well in the buildings and campus space. And ultimately the aim is to try and make them smarter and a better output there for the customer. Talk you a little bit through the agenda for today. So we'll touch upon IoT and what does IoT mean when we're talking about that particular terminology. I'll then talk a little bit about the drivers for change. So why is IoT being adopted? What's kind of pushing this as a technology? And then the impact this specifically has then on buildings. What it means then for the future of buildings going forward, and we'll talk about some examples, both good and bad. And then the overall architecture and the life cycle as well, in terms of a building from design, build through to the operational phase as well. And then we'll end a little bit with a topic on cybersecurity, and then open up questions. I'll begin. In terms of IoT, Oxford Dictionary, and you can see it up there, what it describes it as, but ultimately the coming together of everyday devices and that connection point then to the internet. So the transmission of both monitoring or control data as well up to the internet layer. In terms of IoT, what it means for us is really this acceleration that we see. So you see here, we've got the IT layer at the top. And when we're talking about the IT layer, we're talking about networks, we're talking about connectivity to the internet, servers, cloud. And then at the bottom, we've got the OT. So this is your operational technology, which many of us are familiar with. And this could be, you know, anything from a low voltage board to a phone set. And when we talk about examples here, we see that the IT and the OT coming together can really help to accelerate and optimize a business or a performance. So one of the biggest examples we see in daily life is the taxi service. So the taxi service, traditionally very much an OT technology. Operationally, a car was being operated with a driver, and we introduce an IT layer to that, which was a mobile phone with an application and the connectivity that that brings. Bringing the two together has really transformed that industry. When we consider Uber, now the world's largest taxi service, pretty much not owning a single car themselves. So the transformation that can happen here and the shift that can happen is quite dramatic, to say the least. What's helped to grow this level of digitization? Well, if we consider the 4 points here, so connectivity, and really over the last, I'd say the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen this real shift in terms of connectivity. I remember 10 years ago, you know, Wi-Fi being introduced in mass and not necessarily being trusted, you know, patchy service, unable to actually transmit large amounts of data, unable to actually connect multiple devices. However, standards has helped to drive this to a point now where there is mass adoption of Wi-Fi. And we don't think twice now about connecting our PCs, our computers, our devices to a Wi-Fi network. So the standardization has helped to drive this, and then along with the actual price point of the technology. If we then consider mobile, so, you know, mobile phones, we all know how much we depend on them now, but the actual applications that we do and perform through our mobile phones, we wouldn't have dreamed of maybe 10, 15 years ago. We're able to now, you know, interact with things like banking services, interact with our payslip services, as well as keeping abreast of all of the comms that we get from our work and daily lives. So we're looking for more and more of our daily lives, both from a work perspective and also at home through our mobile technology. And this could be your phone device or an iPad device. And when we consider then users of this, they're actually considering, and users are asking for more and more rich applications to be driven through a mobile device so that they can easily navigate around the application they're looking at and make decisions, and then move on to the next task. Cloud is another shift, and I think more and more we've recognized this, and especially over the last few weeks, is this ability to aggregate multiple forms of data, maybe from multiple different devices, up into the cloud servers. Often being able to work from one application, multiple users around the world, all working from one document, all stored in one place, and ultimately driving to that one version of the truth. So the adoption of Microsoft Teams that many of you might have come across in the last few weeks, more so than ever before, this ability to work from a presentation or an Excel sheet or a data form all together at once. And then analytics. So the cloud allows us to actually aggregate large amounts of data, large quantities of data. The analytics is what gives us some insight and ability to actually understand that data in a more meaningful manner. So again, an example with the Microsoft Teams, I'm able to actually transmit lots of data through my Microsoft Teams, have lots of my meetings being driven through that one point, and quite easily it gives me some rich analytics in terms of number of views, you know, the timing of the views as well, and able to make decisions then based on how I communicate my next spreadsheet or next meeting going forward. But this analytics is really where businesses are able to now contextualize the data that they've got on sites to drive efficiencies to that next level. So the future of the buildings is evolving very quickly, and very many of you are familiar with the urbanization topic. So we see that the shift in people is going to be towards our cities, our towns and cities, where we recognize that 2.5 billion will be by the year 2050. And there's a stat there around the size of Hong Kong basically being built every 8 weeks, and then the number of devices that are being connected. So what that brings with it is a challenge. It brings with it a challenge of space in terms of the buildings within our cities, also the infrastructure around them buildings as well. So consider electrification, consider powering and the energy source, the utilities as well around them buildings, and then the infrastructure around it. So there's some huge challenges ahead for many of the towns and cities and the buildings going forward, where space is becoming a premium. And then on the other side of that, we have this sense of emergency around climate change. So this dilemma, which is not necessarily around energy, it's around, not necessarily around carbon, but it's about the emissions topic. So you can see there that the green arrow is ultimately where we need to get to. And that's a big step change for us to ultimately go down. So if we consider that energy issues, energy is an issue which is 80% of our global impact. It's 40 times a trend in terms of from 1900 to where we see the end of this century coming, is that we'll be using 40 times more energy. And then if we consider the actual losses within the system, we recognize that there's around 60% inefficiency in terms of what we're using today. So there's a big shift change that needs to happen in order for us to continue. What can we do here, and what do we actually estimate with regard to our ability to make an impact here? Firstly, there's some statistics around what we need to do around our buildings. We consider buildings to be an area of inefficiency, and this is both in the new buildings that are being built, where we recognize that there needs to be a shift of between 30 to 50% in terms of how we go about designing and then building them and then actually maintaining them buildings in terms of the efficiency that's required. And then around the same level again in terms of our existing stock. So we consider that our existing buildings are going to continue to be around, potentially repurposed. We need to ensure that we look at them from the most efficient point of view possible. There's also a topic here around electrification. So if we consider now the shifting in terms of how transport will actually be powered and the energy that's being used out from transport. So this shift from the oil to ultimately electrification, it's going to require some dramatic change in both culture, but also the infrastructure around it to support. And then in buildings themselves as well, the use of fossil fuels, such as gas, this shift again in terms of actually energy being produced from electrification, and that electrification actually coming from renewables, such as wind and solar. And we've seen that this is very much possible during the last few weeks. What will be interesting to see is how much we continue on that curve as we go forward. And then ultimately the topic of decarbonisation as well, which we talked about, the renewables, which I mentioned, and this shift of where we see electrification actually being the main energy source by the end of 2030. So over the next 9 to 10 years, we really see this shift as being towards electric. So if we bring it down then to the building space, buildings have to change. And you can see there that 40% of the world's CO2 emissions, they come from our buildings. And that's a real focus area then for our industries to work on as a challenge. We recognize as well, in terms of the urbanization as a topic, that space is being wasted within our existing buildings. And if we consider that around 30% of the space is being wasted, there's an actual opportunity to change that and adopt a more digital, data-driven approach to make buildings more useful. And then an interesting one is around the people topic. So I think over the last few years, we've all become a lot more informed, probably down to the internet being a source of information and sharing on such a quick pace, that the effect environments can have on our own health and our own well-being and mental well-being as well. And we consider that we spend most of our lives indoors and a lot of it actually at work. And we then consider, well, actually the person responsible for the environment at work is probably our FM company or our estates manager, potentially having more of an impact on our health and condition than on our own GP, it could be argued. And then resiliency, and I think in the last few weeks we've all seen the challenges around this, both good and bad, but it's only going to become more dramatic as we go forward. So this ability to be able to work in a flexible way on flexible systems. So I've got an on-site system maintaining, looking after my building. Have I got the ability to switch that to a remote operation or have multiple users accessing the information at any one time? Have I got the ability to actually pull out information and data in a meaningful manner? And then if we throw in there the electrification challenge as well about infrastructure around electric buildings and electric energy source, have I actually got the infrastructure, the reporting, the redundancy as well around my power systems to ensure that I've got a building which is always on? I'm just going to touch upon the people topic a little bit here, because this is an interesting one. So if we go back to ultimately the health of our building and the overall experience that our building has as well, you know, people are demanding more here, and ultimately a building space and the workspace itself can be a form of attracting talent and also retaining talent. And ultimately here there is a big cost, there's a big industry around retention. And it's something to consider when we're actually building that building experience and the user's interaction with the building services. The overall environment itself, so not just from a well-being and health perspective, but can have a dramatic effect on people's overall focus and actual productivity. So there's plenty of research to show this, but we see this ourselves is that when we're in a too hot or too cold climate, or maybe poor levels of lighting, it has an impact on our overall ability to focus, ability to then get work done. And then the customer satisfaction as well. So you've got users of your buildings which are working there every day, and then you've got people that maybe hotels, maybe shopping centres, leisure outlets, and the overall experience level and requirement around this has definitely increased. And this requirement to have the ability to see what's going on in my building environment and actually influence it as a user of that. And all of this then combined together is to actually drive that healthy building outlook. Just going to touch briefly upon what we see as some of the shifts recognized over the last few weeks that could happen going forward. So there's been a lot of talk around some of these topics, including touchless. So this recognition that disease and viruses can ultimately be spread very quickly through surfaces, and then the amount of interaction we all have with different surfaces, we've probably become heightened to as well. So there's a mental aspect there as well. So this ability then to actually interact with a building or a space in a touchless manner, using maybe my phone device to actually access rooms and go through different areas, booking meeting rooms, etc. Maybe an actual shift here as well in terms of how businesses are actually looking at hot desk facilities, and whether hot desks could actually become a thing of the past and actually becomes more nominated. The clean air one is something that we've worked on definitely in the UK and across Europe as well, is this ability to be able to shift at the touch of a button between a normal environment and then actually shift it to a negative pressure environment where I'm now shifting more air into a space and then actually shifting more air out to actually circulate the overall airflow. Sanitation as well, to be basically assured that the areas have been cleaned. So rather than going through routine maintenance through cleaning staff in all areas, the actual cleaning staff following occupants around a building based on their actual occupancy and demand within certain areas, ensuring that there is clean down that takes place and it's logged digitally. And then the actual space itself and being able for businesses to being able to monitor and understand how the space is being utilized and how, you know, a number of people are being actually occupying in certain areas. Is there too many people actually occupying meeting rooms or specific zones, and being able to look at that data very quickly and then actually acting upon it. And then the health checks ones, I'm sure many of us have seen this, but overall technology to kind of manage the health requirement going forward. And this could be everything from thermal imaging to checking visually through a camera whether the correct PPE is being used. So if we go back to the buildings topic a little bit here, there's many of you that will be you know, interacting with what could be seen as smart buildings. I know I've seen many in my time as well in terms of buildings being labelled up as smart. And here we've got two examples. So both labelled up as smart buildings, and I'd say, you know, perceptions can be deceiving here. And really, the building on the left was using some of the latest and greatest in terms of technology, but very much driven in a silo manner, using proprietary controls. And this is closed protocol. So this was information and data that could be shared across a single system, but it wasn't easy for that system then to share and transmit that data, you know, in a flexible way to other systems. It wasn't able to share that data. And then you get more and more complexity as that building changes and adapts through its life, as the building purpose starts to change, which ultimately happens with most buildings and their evolution. The building on the right, exactly the same, using the kind of latest and greatest in terms of its overall building technology. But ultimately the difference here is that it was using open technology, it was connecting to networks, it had, you know, plans around its data and how that data and traffic would be transmitted and shared across systems, allowing then for that building to be ultimately developed over time as well. You know, I'm going to now share information from one building service system into another and ensure that then I can drive a level of efficiency which is required. I'm able then to develop an app for my users, and my app for my users, I'm able to connect to lots of different systems because they're all open, they're all sat on my network. And my user can now interact quite meaningful with, you know, the temperature, the overall lighting. I can throw in third-party services such as maybe local traffic information in there as well, ultimately driving to that demand that we're getting around the user experience when people actually enter into a building or they're working in a building space. So at the heart of this, really, the example on the left is that it comes down to data. It comes down to the inability to actually share and present data in a meaningful way, and then be able to actually have a plan around that that's developed. And this is really where we're seeing maybe buildings kind of fall over with regards to the smart terminology. In terms of data, and when we talk about data, what does it mean? Well, there's the 4 V's that we often refer to. So the volume of data in terms of what's meaningful data I'm able to get out of the different systems, and then the ability to actually compute that. The variety of data in terms of the different systems I'm interacting with. It's no good if I've got lots of systems sharing data, but they're not able to actually communicate to one another because they're all sharing it in a different way, using maybe different languages, maybe programmed in different ways. And then the velocity of the data, this is quite an important one. So, you know, we talk here about users being able to make decisions using apps or a maintenance manager being able to drive a level of efficiency. It's no good if the data can't be presented at the same time from various different systems when them changes need to happen. And this could differ depending on what actions need to take place. So if I'm linking my lighting system to, say, my building management system and my occupancy system, I need them to react all in the same time. It's no good me entering a room and 2-3 seconds later the lights come on. That's not going to develop the right level of experience for my users. However, if I'm making actions based on data of maybe the number of people that are occupying the building for the day, that's something that can be presented to me at different points in the day, and I'm not too urgent with that. And then the veracity of the data itself. So this is an interesting one in terms of we've all experienced it when we get data from a system and that's telling us one thing, and then we get data from another system, maybe it's pointing towards the same kind of area or environment, but actually it's telling us something different. And straight away we're in this level of uncertainty, and we're in an area there where we don't trust the systems and what it's telling us. So the ability then to drive meaningful actions off the back of that data is pretty much gone. So that's a really, really important piece there as well. What do the buildings of the future need to be? Well, we talk about the 4 pillars here. So sustainable, ultimately maximizing the electrification. And what I mean by this is that if we go back to the topic around renewables and the topic around electrification in terms of vehicles, it's now going to be a different world. I'm going to have a number of vehicles turning up to my building, potentially plugging into chargers. I've now got main energy sources being actually electricity as well. So am I in a position to be able to actually manage my electrical infrastructure and manage it in a way which reduces the level of complexity that all of these different systems can bring, and I'm able to shift loads of electric across my building at different times of day? Am I able to take advantage of some of the renewables that I might have on site, or free energy as well? And then we're in a space here of actually not just managing the electrification, but driving a level of efficiency as well. Hyper efficiency. So this takes into account some of the efficiencies that we could have been doing around sustainability and driving energy reduction. But also, am I using areas such as, my meeting rooms? Am I using my different zones in a efficient way? We often see requests for buildings to be expanded, extended, maybe tenants within a building requesting that they need to move to another space because the space, they've outgrown it. And what often happens, or what we're able to see, is we can put in sensors into the space and then understand how that building is currently being used. So my meeting rooms, which were meant for 8 people, are they actually being used by 8 people? Or is there are often cases where there's one person going into that meeting room for maybe 3-4 hours at a time, and therefore the meeting room is being used inefficiently? Have I got large zones which aren't being used? Understanding all of this can help me to actually develop my building and drive a level of efficiency within my existing space. And then the human centricity piece that we talked about, though, this is the demand from the users to want a much more healthy building, to actually have a much more pleasant building experience that they work within, and kind of developing that superior comfort. Ensuring it's safe and healthy is definitely a key feature going forward. And for businesses, ultimately wanting them to be more productive, wanting people to actually, retention as well within building. And there's also research here as well around the collaboration. So we've got these areas of openness and open spaces within buildings. Are we actually gaining collaboration between people? Do we understand if user groups are actually interacting with each other, or are people still forming their own zones and their own spaces, even in open offices? And then resilience. So this ability to be flexible both on-site and remotely, and I'd say in parallel. So you've got to have the ability to drive both, and then this level of, I'd say, differing information for differing users. So there's going to be more and more people that are going to be wanting to interact with the data that comes out of a building. So I've now got HR requesting me, I've now got health and safety requesting me, understanding where people are in a building, how many people are using different spaces, what's the occupancy level. Am I able to give that information quickly? Am I able to give the efficiency levels quickly to the relevant people that need it? And then if we go back a little bit to the electrification, this resilience topics emerges again around power reliability. You know, have I got resilience in my system? Should power start to fail and start to shift? Have I got that ability to understand where that's coming from, but also the resilience in the meantime to look at the most critical items on my building site? So here's an example of what a building could look like ultimately. So in the grey, you see here on the building example, we've got the renewable technologies. We've got electric vehicles as well. So these are the different electric generators that we've got maybe on site, and also the different electric users as well that we've got on site. So just managing the items in grey when we consider, you know, LV and MV in terms of electrification of our buildings, the renewables that might exist as well. And then we've still got the grid interacting, and you might well be serving the grid with some of the renewables to ensure that we're the most sustainable building possible. And then I've got users as well in terms of electric vehicles coming in. So am I in a position that, like I said, in the morning, you know, 100 vehicles come in at 8:30 in the morning, and have I got the ability to shift the loads so that I'm able to serve the demands of them electric vehicles over the course of the day while still maintaining the rest of my assets on site and doing it in the most efficient possible manner? Then in terms of hyper efficiency, so this understanding of data and how the building's being used, and if we look here, we're talking about space management and workplace management. So this is ultimately how people are using the different spaces. Have I got the ability and the data that's actually coming out from there, and then interacting it with the rest of my system? The human centricity in terms of then what people want in terms of interacting with the space. And this might be through multiple forms. So it might not necessarily be driven all through an app on your phone. It might well be driven through, you know, standards in terms of still having switches in rooms, in meeting rooms, etc., that people want to interact with, but in a much more smarter manner, timeout functions, etc. And then the resilience piece in terms of remote operations, you can see there in the top left, along with the cybersecurity piece as well, ensuring that the business risk is mitigated around cybersecurity. And then this power reliability piece as well that we talked about. So very briefly here, you'll see an example of almost a day in the life of. So what could a smart building give to a user in terms of how they would actually interact with that space? And the kind of route that we take you through here ultimately is only possible through connecting the different assets on site, through connecting the different services on site and creating that rich environment for a user. So finding a parking spot, maybe through a parking automation system, and actually when they park up, how do they interact with the electric vehicle charging point? Ultimately through their phone, and then what's the credentials and the lock-in for that, sharing that data. Understanding that visitors are coming to site as well, maybe through that same function, and creating the same level of experience for them is going to require connectivity. And then once a person is on site as well, how do they find a suitable space for them to work on? So before the crisis hit, and it might well change over time, but businesses were looking at ultimately, you know, making the most of their space. So they might identify that there is 1,000 users for a building. However, they'll only put in around 400 to 500 desks, recognizing that not every single user is going to be in every single day of the week. And actually, when they're in, they're not always at their desk. They're ultimately using little cubby rooms in terms of being on the phone, or maybe in meeting rooms, or maybe in different zones. So this ability to actually understand where people are, and for people to actually interact with the space and hot desks, and understanding what is free, and driving them around the building in the most efficient manner. And then this user interaction in terms of using their overall device or maybe the local space to adjust their comfort settings for what they actually want, reducing overall occupant complaints and user complaints, and delivering that user experience that everyone demands. And then you can see there's some further examples, and I'll let you read through them, but interacting with other parties on site. So I can reduce wastage and drive more sustainable building approach here by users interacting with the canteen services on site and actually understanding what people might want for their lunch beforehand and getting them to pre-select this, making sure then I only deliver the required amount of food that is required in terms of what people are asking for, reducing wastage in terms of food and output. And then interacting with some of the other services outside of our buildings as well. So I've seen many apps now that are developed, interacting with local transit services, interacting with the traffic services, etc. Even concierge type apps as well. So here's an example of the different systems that you might see on a site today. Trying to address these different challenges that we've talked about and trying to make a more sustainable, more efficient building of the future. So I'm able to drive a level of longevity and asset protection for all the building services I've got on site. I've got them now connected into some powerful analytics. I've got the ability to understand how my space is being managed and utilized. And again, I've got that driven with lots of good level reporting and data that's being outputted from that. I'm understanding my energy and sustainability. I understand how I'm procuring my energy, driving at my actual energy usage on site, and I've got a good handle of that using the different services I've got there. And then the overall well-being management, I might well have some applications here, trying to drive and improve my well-being and my engagement with my people on site through various different apps and applications. And you can see here at the top, there's the occupant engagement in terms of they're interacting with all the different pieces here. And what we're ultimately predicting here is that there needs to be this shift towards not just driving everything in a siloed fashion, but being able to share between these systems. This is where we see true hyper efficiency, where we need to get to if we're going to address the challenges around emissions, where we're going to get to if we want to address the demand around your user experience. So this ability now for something to happen within my space management, and then it has an effect on my overall asset management system. You know, maybe my electric maintenance systems, my electric management systems, maybe my building management system and lighting control systems. So this ability that there is a cause that happens in one system, and then we're able to cause a reaction instantly in the other. And through this, what we see is that this evolution of, it's almost a data lake environment where all of the different data from the different systems is coming from open systems, open platforms that we're able to share and populate into one common stream. So we create this common stream of data that we can share and flex between the systems, driving importantly that efficiency piece. And this is all packaged together then using cybersecurity. So we select cybersecurity products. We ensure that there is cybersecurity policies on site and the way we manage this data and the way that we actually share it across the different platforms. So I'll talk a little bit about the architecture that we've developed within our business, which kind of explains more or less the last slide a little bit more basically. So here we see the kind of products piece. So these are the different systems that we would interact with. So these could be anything from PLCs to electric breakers, to building management sensors, to people sensors. And what we're saying here is that this needs to shift to become more connected, which we see emerging more and more so, especially over the last 5 years or so. This interacts with the different systems that we have within a building environment. So this could be my building management system. This could be my SCADA system. We still feel that these could be managed systems on site, both on site or maybe even in the cloud, but they're needed. They provide engineers, they provide teams with ultimately being able to monitor and make very quick mission critical decisions on the overall conditions within them particular assets. But really, this is where we can make the shift. So this is where we can drive a level of efficiency, is that sharing of data. So we take the systems that we've got here at the edge control, but also the different products that we've got that are now connected, and we're able to pull them into that top level here, drive powerful analytics and develop them insights for the users, then being able to make decisions on that. But also importantly as well, we're able to develop the apps here, which we can create rich environments for our users to interact with. So an example architecture here from a buildings point of view, you can see some of the systems we've talked about here. So, LV systems with breakers and contactors, meters. So this electrification also becoming more connected. UPSs, in terms of that resilience that we talked about, again, becoming more connected. And then we've got things like room sensors, room controllers, BMS controllers. At the edge level, we've got different examples. So I touched upon building management systems, but think about other systems that we might well have within a building space, which aren't necessarily linked to building services. So I might have a financial reporting system, which could actually benefit from linking in with occupancy data within that system. I might have other systems such as room booking systems as well with that. And then at that top level here, where we drive the analytics, we're talking about everything from driving asset-led information. So my assets around the building services, around electrical systems, around mechanical systems, but then also in terms of the renewables that I might have on site, and that interaction with the grid, that interaction with electric vehicles as well. So what I'm creating there is almost this microgrid on my building, this mini grid that I need to manage and maintain. So we're talking here then about microgrid management. And then these systems actually being able to share across the different platforms. And then when we have a look at it, we talk about the OPEX piece quite a lot here, but there's a huge efficiency to be gained at the CAPEX piece as well. And this is where we're seeing some actual developments happen over probably the last 18 months, and we'll see some significant ones over the next few years as well. So this drive at being more sustainable through the whole building process, and not just talking about the OPEX side of things, but actually how do we go to design a building and ensure that we deliver it in the most sustainable way? What materials are we using? Are we taking in the actual emissions that have been led to actually construct that building in the first place? And then the complexity then that brings, how are we using digital and digital services to actually understand how to build that building in the most efficient way, which is then going to have the most effective output from the operational phase as well. So this is where Schneider have acquired a company called RIB, which is a £1.4 billion acquisition, and they work on ultimately a level of digital services around the building phase. But we're going to see some increased legislation. We're already seeing something come out from the UK Green Council around this as well, and driving more sustainability in the overall building approach. And if I just finish on a couple of examples here. I know this event was originally due to take place at the University of Nottingham. So we have partnered in the past. They're an existing customer of ours as well, where they've got some legacy systems working with Schneider Electric across their portfolio. And actually the challenge here was around how they actually make use of the legacy to the new system upgrades that were taking place, and actually drive a level of productivity out of it and digitization. And they took forward then the approach to ultimately look to connect and share more information across their platforms, using our EcoStruxure platform as the basis of that, and trying to improve their overall visibility and control around their renewables that they've got on site. And also having an impact on an already mature estate on their energy consumption. But through that visibility, I think as well, importantly, that they drove down a level of maintenance efficiency as well there. So there's a link there to that particular case study that you can click on after this particular presentation. And then finally here, I'll just touch upon cybersecurity. So cybersecurity isn't one of my domain expertise, let's say, but we're all fastly having to kind of become more familiar in this particular subject area. It's an actual individual topic. I'd say we've all got a sense of responsibility around this space, considering that ultimately a large amount of hacks come through individual user error, let's say. So this might be the level of password protection we actually adopt within systems, within our own systems and within our building services systems. This might be the usage of USB keys, and then locking down USB keys on systems which have actual USB ports. This might be the amount of phishing attacks that we receive as well through emails. We recognize that smart buildings is an opportunity for hackers to ultimately adopt. So we need to have this heightened sense of responsibility around smart buildings and how we manage that sharing of data and open systems. So Schneider Electric have worked quite heavily with a lot of other cybersecurity specialists within businesses to work on architecture. So we've got a standard architecture that we ultimately adopt. And then we're able to provide the advice, in particular around the operational technology. So this is really where people are less comfortable. So I've got an LV board, and I'm looking to connect it and open up the data and share that across my system. And there's this reluctance to ultimately do that should somebody come in and be able to hack that. So we can offer some advice and ultimately surveys around this. And maybe at a later date, one of our professionals can deliver the cybersecurity in building management systems that we're able to deliver from our business. So I take this opportunity to do a quick poll, if it's not been done already, before we just move to the questions and answer session. So Matthew, I'm not sure if you have to activate something around the poll, but you can see there it is. So it's there on the screen. So just a question around the adoption of power systems becoming more digitized as a standard. So where do you see this actually happening? So this is, when I talk about power systems, this might be your LV system and being able to share that data and being more open to connecting and it becoming the de facto standard, let's say, across the industry, and how quickly you see this happening. So there's some various options there. The one that I think I left out as an option was never going to happen, which I'm sure it won't. So I'm sure it'll happen a lot quicker, but be interesting to see your views. Okay. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and thank you for taking the time out of your evening to listen as well, in particular, during these times. Matthew, have we got an output to the polls, or is it still coming in?
It's still coming in. We'll give it another 30 seconds to run, and then I'll end it. So after 2 minutes. Okay. Whilst that's going, are there any questions? So again, you can ask questions via the Q&A facility at the bottom, or raise a hand and we can transfer the microphone over to you. Okay. Well, I have a question to start it off then. I was interested in, from a project perspective, and Schneider, clearly there is a massive scale. There are customers that manage the construction of the building and all the IT systems themselves. Maybe there's customers that outsource it to you. Clearly, I suppose the more influence you have over the overall construction and IT systems, the better in terms of the efficiency. Can you give some idea of the kind of the breadth there, Kaz?
Yeah. So I guess here we're talking about what ability we've got to actually impact the buildings themselves from our point of view. And I think the kind of piece here really that I take away is around open systems. About open systems and that IT layer. So if we go right back to the beginning and we talk about this IT and OT, so I'm sure many people on the call today are professionals around the OT space. So they know their operational technology fairly well. They've been educated and trained around that space, around the engineering of a system or the technology that in the systems they work in. So for myself, it's around a building management system and what that can bring in terms of the overall environmental conditions. Maybe for somebody else, it's around the electrical system. And it's probably understanding the shift that's happening right now that's going to create some potential trends in your area. And then, ultimately, I need to be able to now share my system. I need to be able to share the data from my system to another system. And that can only come with IT networks. It can only come with openness of data. I think in terms of the construction space, it's an emerging piece right now. And I feel maybe legislation will drive it here, as well as businesses as well. So at the moment, businesses, it isn't compulsory for them to actually present and share data around sustainability, but it's becoming more of a kind of de facto demand. Let's say there's this CSR responsibility, and I think socially people are asking more and more around, is it more sustainable? Is this building actually sustainable? What emissions does this business actually output? Everything in terms of their domain. And if a business now owns a building or multiple buildings, they will have a responsibility to actually drive a level of efficiency. So I think there'll be a demand from actual end users and the way they go to build buildings to actually drive it in a sustainable manner, as well as some level of legislation. But legislation tends to happen, let's say, a little bit slower than the overall demand piece.
Sure, yeah. Okay, thanks, Kaz. We have a question on the Q&A facility from David Brooke. So you can see that at the bottom. I'll read it out. Seems that some considerations are mostly for building landlords, for example, EV charge balancing, and others, for instance, meeting room booking and occupancy. I'm more for tenants. Where there might be several tenants in one building, do you see a need for collaboration between these different parties in some sort of ecosystem?
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant question. And interestingly, we were on a call the other day with one of the world's largest real estate companies, and they almost expressed that the way they had been doing this going forward was it was the tenants' requirement to, if they wanted to heighten the experience and wanted a better experience for their users and more sustainable systems, it was almost their responsibility. You put it in, we just look after the shell and core kind of thing. I think they're starting to see this shift is actually the building users, the actual tenants themselves, are actually requesting a more digital approach, a better user experience, and they want to live and work within a space which is more sustainable as well. So we go back to this demand again of, I'm occupying a space and I'm Schneider Electric. I've got a responsibility now. I'm going to be printing exactly what I'm doing from a sustainability point of view, what my overall emissions output is. So how can I do that in a building? I think this shift towards actually all the parties working together is definitely something that's going to happen going forward. And some of the real estate companies are actually realizing this now. Okay, there's another question here. So the growth in data will presumably drive AI analytics. This could be enhanced with the sharing of data across similar buildings. Are you aware of the developments in this? So this is really nice question here. So yeah, absolutely, something that we're working on. I think unfortunately at the moment, so we're driving a technology and we're developing something on the AI side, but I feel we're in a space at the moment where we still haven't fully recognized this ability to actually connect the data and just to be able to kind of drive it in a different way. So the AI piece will come. I think at the moment, just trying to get businesses over the line and say, for instance, you've got 1,000 assets, buildings around the world, and getting them to understand that, hold on, 50% of their buildings are maybe similar. And if you were to connect them all up, you'd have the ability then in real time to benchmark, understand, and drive some mass adoption of change across several different buildings. Really exciting space that we are moving into. And then, as you say, the AI piece is that ability then to actually drive them changes once you've started to implement them on one building across many others. How do you balance the desired outcomes of the key stakeholder groups? For example, building owners usually seek greater efficiency, minimizing car parking spaces and desks, whereas employees want to sit alongside close colleagues, and in my experience find ingenious ways of finding ways around booking systems or start work earlier to secure a parking space. How much can you influence the behavior of groups of people? Really, really good question. So unfortunately, a lot of my answers are around data again. And, if we understand what is going on very quickly, we can start to try and implement change of culture. And that's got to be a hearts and minds campaign on the ground. So I think people need to understand the why. So why is it important? It's not just, it's a rule and this is what we're doing. It's kind of seeking that why. And I think the sustainability message is a really important one when we start to break it down. Before the crisis, and the crisis is now the biggest topic, but before that, we were seeing some rapid acceleration from a social perspective around sustainability. And people, the everyday person now starting to really understand and seek from their employers as well, what are you doing around sustainability? So I think that will happen in time as well. And I think when we consider the younger generation as well that are starting to work now, they're growing into this adoption of ultimately, sustainability is the be all and end all. It's the number one priority.
Okay, thanks, Kaz. We've got the results for the polling. So the question was, how quickly do you see that digital adoption in power systems becomes a standard? 1 to 2 years, 11%, 3 to 5 years, 44%, 6 to 10 years, 42%, and greater than 10 years is 3%. So the highest looks like 3 to 5 years.
Very interesting. No, it's definitely interesting to see, because I think that's a space which is still, I'd say we're in that 50-50 mode, which very much kind of reflects maybe some of that approach there we're seeing. It'd be interesting to see how this now develops as businesses plan to go back to work, and ultimately the design starts to shift around buildings in terms of what users are asking for. I think it's still a question mark though of space and how space is being managed. I've seen differing research around this as well in terms of, I think at first many thought maybe people will come out of the cities and businesses will start to create smaller hubs. And now there's this talk of actually buildings having more space, being more spread out, and desks being further spread out. And this obviously touchless technology. So it'll be interesting to see how we adopt digital in all of that approach. There's a couple of more questions coming in as well. So existing buildings cost to become smart buildings. How can this be financed? Could be a huge cost as well as deterrence to go to smart. Interesting question. So I think when we're building buildings at the moment, we consider aspects of the capex, let's say. So we consider the cost to build. But we're not always then looking to seek a full understanding of the real operational expenditure. So I think this will be interesting to see if we start to shift. And again, if legislation pushes us down this line where when we're thinking about building a building right at the beginning, we're actually considering the full life cycle, maybe the 50, 60 year life cycle of that building and what the operational cost will be. Because ultimately, whatever we decide to do in the capex, there will be drivers that will have to kind of come in during the operational phase. So do you think there is a limit or minimum size of building and users that this can apply to and be cost effective and implement? It's an interesting one. So I think the technology as it stands today is probably more of an approach for medium large systems. So when we consider things like, you know, talking about some of the open technology, automation, driving data lakes, you need scale to drive the meaningful efficiency, let's say, that's required there, and have a relevant shorter return on investment that everyone would be happy with. But I think we'll see some emerging technology start to happen, and standards and standard approaches to what we do on the larger scale begin to then be adopted on the smaller scale. So really, I think we need to lead by example on the bigger buildings that are going on, you know, the top maybe 500-600 construction projects that happen, and driving that level of hyper efficiency there to then develop standards for tomorrow on the smaller buildings and the smaller scale. I'd say in terms of the size of the buildings and in terms of the smaller scale, often there's still one large end user involved. So if I consider buildings such as maybe local government, council, often they have hundreds of small buildings and assets, and the ability then to actually just connect into multiple buildings, and again use that same approach of sharing data across the system, of benchmarking, and then driving a level of efficiency can be had then even at that level. And there's a business that we're working with at the moment, and they've got over 100,000 assets, all extremely small. So they're looking at how they can leverage that data across all of them and drive that level of efficiency. And the big question mark is almost, where do I start? How do I begin, kind of thing. So, and it becomes a case of, you know, proving that, doing a case study internally, you know, picking off 2 or 3 buildings and then driving it that way, and kind of sharing that change across the estate.
Thank you very much for the questions. There's been some pretty good ones there, and thanks for the answers, Kaz. That was good. So if there are no more questions, I don't think there are, we'll draw it to a close. I'm sure the audience will join me in thanking Kaz for a very informative, very topical presentation. So thank you very much, Kaz, and thanks for your time.
No, thank you. It's been enjoyable to present, and I have enjoyed the questions. Have been really good as well. So I almost feel regretful that it's going to end so soon. But thank you for the opportunity. Yeah,
that's good. And to the audience, thanks for attending. Keep safe and keep looking out for future webinars from the IT. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.